They can make their judgment.
Okay,
Yeah.
are you on it?
Yes, I'm on it. When did it do again?
Another week or two?
Okay.
With the same thing.
Just pass it down.
Josh.
David.
Which I felt very happy for having.
Yeah, David.
Right there.
Oh, thanks. I didn't know who I was.
Yeah, that's one vacation. Two meetings, but you have forms that could maybe get out of committee to maybe share at the full board meeting. The presenters during the full board meeting, only to be like, oh, we don't have a forum, we can.
You're being recorded, I wish I would have said. Good evening, everyone. We're just waiting for a few more committee members to attend. Thank you for your patience.
The speaker is not working.
It's so hot in here.
Toasty.
Like I love the elevator and I just started sweating immediately.
Hello.
How's it going, Sachi?
David, let me know when you're ready and when we have a forum.
Go ahead.
Same thing.
Yes. Yes, Peter.
At the side or this one, so.
Hey, guys, can anybody hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great.
Good evening, everyone. This is Manhattan Community Board 5 State Licenses and Permits Committee. I'm Nick Anthony. I'll be your chair. We have one item on the agenda tonight, MSG or C for liquor license renewal at Madison Square Garden for Pennsylvania Plaza. Before we get to the agenda item, is there any new business for the committee? Anyone have any new business or other business for the committee? Please use the raise hand button now. Okay, seeing none, new business is closed. To begin the meeting, I'll introduce the applicant. We'll ask the applicant's team to introduce themselves, and then I'll turn the meeting over to one of the committee members who's reviewed the application, who will give us a presentation. I'll allow the applicant an opportunity to speak and comment at any time during that part of the meeting. Anyone from the committee can ask questions or make comments just by raising their hand. Before we start the agenda, we'll go around the room with attendance. I'm Nick Athanale. I'm the committee chair.
Libby Hutton. Sachi Takahashi Rao.
Seth Borden.
Miles Kerwin. Yaron Nodi Victor.
Samir Levingia.
Janice Young. BJ Sung.
David Sigmund.
And online, we have members present virtually.
Catherine
Tom.
Ellington.
Catherine.
Todd Shapiro.
Tiffany.
Tiffany Revis, yeah.
Okay. So in order to begin the first item, we'll ask the applicant to introduce themselves. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Rich Constable. I run Government Affairs and Corporate Social Responsibility at Madison Square Garden. And with me is Hal Weidenfeld, the Associate General Counsel at Madison Square Garden Entertainment.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us. Just for the information of the committee and the public, we learned that the SLA has already renewed your liquor license, which actually expires today. Can you confirm that that's correct?
That is correct. We have our liquor license in hand.
Great. So the committee can still discuss the renewal. We can discuss the SLA proceedings that are involved with the MSG liquor license. And our whatever resolution we arrive at will still be sent to the SLA for our comments. Okay, Todd, are you gonna take the lead on this?
Yes, I will. And I'm remotely with possibly sketchy internet access, so she can step in for me at any point. She's been briefed on the due diligence, but here we go. So it's a renewal for a liquor license. It includes Madison Square Garden, I believe Radio City Music Hall, and a number of other properties related to the entity that manages the garden. So
I'm not sure that's correct. I think this, and.
is it
Rich,
just
perhaps
Madison
you can-
Square Garden?
Yes.
Rich? Yeah, it's just
Right.
Madison Square Garden at 4 Pennsylvania Plaza. That's
Okay,
what the
it's,
application is for tonight.
okay, excuse me, it's just Madison Square Garden. So there are a number of issues related to the liquor license renewal. I'll just mention them briefly so we can home in on those before we turn it over to the representatives from the garden. The first one has to do with the condition of the liquor license to guarantee equal access or reasonable equal access under the terms of the liquor license in allowing people to enter the premises. So there have been reports and issues related to lawyers that work at law firms that have litigation against the garden, and they have been turned away at the door on the grounds that there is pending litigation and that their presence at the garden with their families or with people that they arrive with validly purchased tickets will somehow prejudice the cases before the garden. In speaking with the applicant, and I had a good conversation with them, and they'll explain their reasoning behind this, they feel that that is within reason, given the small number of people relative to the people that show up at the garden, and that it shouldn't be interpreted as a way that is in conflict with that requirement of the liquor license. So they'll speak to that issue. So that's one of the issues. We did, in doing the due diligence, talk to other neighborhood stakeholders that were concerned about this issue of the lack of equal access. That would include the local block association, who sent a letter in to the CB5 office saying that they felt that, you know, this was an unfair infringement on individuals who wanted to gain entry to the premises and enjoy it. So, you know, there's some concern about people in the neighborhood about this particular policy. Another policy that is at issue with this renewal is the use of digital imagery and artificial intelligence to make decisions about granting access. So the way it works, and again, the applicant will explain this process in detail, I hope, is they have a process whereby people's faces are scanned and they're checked against some kind of database or online resource that has the digital images of the people. And if it shows up on what is in effect a blackball list, it'll literally generate a message to the people providing entry, and the people will be turned away. So there's two issues there, some of which have come before our community board before. One is, you know, using somebody's digital image without their permission in a way that benefits another party, whether it's for financial or pecuniary or legal interest, as is being done here, is not something that our community board looks kindly on. You know, it's come up in other contexts. And of course, the other reason is whether or not that process is reasonably accurate or fair in the sense that it conflicts with the equal access condition of the liquor license. So again, we're looking forward to hearing just how that works so we can assess in rendering our advisory opinion whether that's a reasonable way of, you know, deciding whether people get in or out. And then a third reason just has to do with more traditionally prosaic issues with a liquor license, which is that there have been reports that have come to our attention in our due diligence that the procedures in place within the garden as to the amount of alcohol being served and patrons leaving the garden and behaving in an unruly manner, urinating in closed storefronts, within the presence or the immediate vicinity. There have been concerns in the community about that. So it's appropriate for us in commenting on the renewal to ask the garden and their management, what they're doing about this, whether they recognize it as a concern and what they might do to improve it or remedy this issue. So those are I think, really the three key issues. And again, we'd like to give the applicant every opportunity to deal with this. And I would urge them to focus really on the key issue is, the positions they've taken, are they consistent or in conflict with the requirement of the liquor license to give people fair and equal access to get in? And that's given the fact that we all understand that obviously if you have a private venue and you're running it and serving alcohol, that yes, of course, you can turn people away as a bouncer would, if they're unruly, if they're dangerous, if the place is packed and there's no more room. But, this issue, whether you can turn somebody away because they're working at a law firm or some other entity that has, an issue with, the management in such a way that it's unfair. The other thing I would ask the applicant to do is just give us, Nick has already mentioned that the liquor license has already been renewed, right? But if you could also give us some insight into the related litigation, I believe, and I had spoken with the applicant about this, there are other procedural hearings going on that with regard to this license and the applicant. If you could just fill us in on how that may affect or impact some of these issues that I've talked about, so that as we discuss it among ourselves and also for the public, we can see if that should be weighed in our decision making. Okay, so with that, I'd like to turn it over, unless Nick, you have anything. I'd like to turn that over to the applicant.
Anything from the committee before we go to the applicant? Okay, Rich and Hal,
Thank you.
you've got a laundry list of things to discuss.
Chair and committee member Shapiro, we'd like to thank the community board for inviting us here tonight to discuss MSG's liquor license application. As discussed, Madison Square Garden's liquor licenses have already been renewed by the State Liquor Authority. And while the licenses have already been renewed, we are always open to hearing feedback from our community. With that in mind, we are here to address questions from the board that relate to our sale of alcohol. That said, however, as you just outlined, we know that the committee may wish to address some questions regarding MSG's use of facial recognition technology at the garden. At the outset, I want to emphasize that MSG's use of facial recognition technology is in full compliance with all applicable city, state, and federal laws. As we stated previously, at the garden, we utilize a number of security tools to keep our guests and employees safe. Facial recognition is one of those tools. And given that the garden is a global destination located above the Western Hemisphere's busiest train hall, we need to be particularly vigilant. MSG is far from alone in our use of facial recognition. This technology is widely used in sports and entertainment venues, retail locations, casinos, and airports in New York and throughout the country. I would also like to clarify certain points that relate to MSG's use of facial recognition technology. First, our use of this technology is limited to identifying at our point of entry, one, individuals who we have previously identified as having engaged in misconduct at one of our venues or threatened to engage in misconduct. And two, attorneys who are temporarily excluded pursuant to our adverse attorney policy. Regarding our adverse attorney policy, in June of 2022, MSG instituted a straightforward policy whereby attorneys from law firms pursuing active litigation against MSG cannot attend events at our venue until that litigation is over. It's important to note that every single firm that is impacted by our adverse attorney policy has been directly notified. We should also note that not all attorneys who initiate litigation against MSG are temporarily excluded. For example, attorneys who represent plaintiffs who allege discrimination or sexual harassment are not subject to this policy. Further, the policy only applies to attorneys. It does not apply to their family or friends or non-attorneys who work at the adverse firm, nor does it apply to the plaintiffs they represent. Importantly, numerous impacted firms are and have been welcomed back to the Garden when their litigation has ended. As you're probably aware, we are currently involved in litigation related to our adverse attorney policy and our use of facial recognition technology. Because of that, and per the advice of our counsel, during this hearing, we cannot go into greater detail regarding our adverse attorney policy or our use of facial recognition technology beyond what I just detailed. Again, I want to reemphasize that MSG's use of facial recognition technology, as well as our implementation of our adverse attorney policy, comply with all applicable city, state, and federal laws. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions that the committee may have, recognizing that if it impacts pending litigation, we're not going to be able to go further. Thank you.
I had one preliminary question. You mentioned that you do not exclude attorneys representing sexual harassment or discrimination plaintiffs. Can you give us an idea of the types of suits that would temporarily prevent attorneys?
Look, we're not going to detail each and every type of litigation that could impact or implicate this, but easy ones or tort litigation.
Okay.
Personal injury, so on and so forth.
Got it. So slip and fall, things like that. Does the committee understand what a tort is? Okay.
So the slip and fall category are or are not allowed entry?
Are not.
Okay, understood. So I have a couple of questions which I'd like to pursue. So if an attorney brings his kids or his family to the Garden to see the circus or to see a Knick game or a Ranger game, so unless he's been told in advance of the Garden's policy or by the law firm, his family would be allowed in, but he himself would not be. But as a practical matter, if the parent was on the list, he probably would the entire family would in effect not enter. They're not going to go in without their father or mother. Is that what would happen in that case?
So, as I stated in my prepared remarks, family members, friends, non-attorneys at the firms are not implicated. And beyond that, I can't speak to whether an individual would or would not encourage their friends or family members to see the game in your example.
And then the other
question?
yeah.
Todd, let's give some other people a chance.
Sure.
We'll come back to you. Libby?
I just wanted to clarify, is this attorneys who specifically are engaged with litigation with the corporation entity MSG, or is it with any principal of that corporation too? Because you said the sexual assault, like plaintiff's attorneys are not excluded. I just wanted clarification around that.
On whether it's for individuals or.
We said sexual discrimination, not sexual
Sexual, yes.
assault.
Sexual, like sexual misconduct, whether it's only attorneys who will be excluded are attorneys who are engaged in a lawsuit against like the corporate entity as opposed to any individual who comprises the corporate entity.
I think the question is, if someone was suing James Dolan, for example, would that firm be on the temporary excluded list?
Yes.
You want to answer it?
Yeah, please.
They're not on the list.
Got it, okay. Other questions from the committee?
Yeah,
BJ?
yeah, clarifying question to that. So let's say I'm an attorney at White and Davis and White. Is it the whole firm that's banned, or is it just me and my team that's working on it that's banned?
It's all attorneys at the adverse firm.
But follow up to that, but your legal secretary, who's also at this firm, is not excluded,
Correct.
Just a attorney.
despite the fact they might be working on the case also.
It's the attorney.
It's the turn.
Okay, just clarifying who's involved.
Anybody else? Todd, you want to continue? You have more, you have more
Yeah,
questions?
so the issue, one of the things that's troubling to me is you say you're in compliance with all state, city, and federal laws, but my understanding of it is that if somebody's image is used or taken without their permission, unless it's, some de minimis use of it, if it's taken by, let's say, a third-party company or some service that you're using, and it's being used to benefit the garden or other people in a way that profits the garden, and it's done without the permission of the person whose image is being used. There's case law in New York where that is not legal. So, that's one thing I'd like to hear your defense of. And then the other thing is it seems like your rule is too broadly drawn. I mean, at a law firm, let's say you have a law firm, one of the big law firms, and there are hundreds of people working there, hundreds of attorneys. Many of them have absolutely nothing to do with the case. Wouldn't it be reasonable to, tighten or draw a narrower scope if what you're trying to do is prevent, the prejudicing of your client in a case? It seems kind of broad, what you're doing there. In speaking with you, I know that you feel that the numbers of people are not great, but really as a community board, if we have citizens, we like to look out for the individual. If an individual, in a practical way, as the example I gave before with the family, if they're kept out of a major place like the garden, that's something that we have to be concerned with and have to weigh very carefully in commenting on, whether or not, the renewal or the granting of the license is being honored. And I know that was actually, that kind of thinking was a concern of the Block Association. Can you speak to those issues?
I forgot your first issue, but on your second issue, we don't deem this the appropriate forum to discuss our analysis. So we have nothing further to add. And can you tell me your first issue?
Well, the first one was, the legal analysis of using somebody's digital image, whether that's appropriate. The second question, I think you're
Yeah,
responding
so
to.
just on the first issue, we're confident in our legal position on this. We believe that the use that we have done now for the better part of a year and a half is appropriate. And we believe that any court that looks at it is going to agree with our use.
Can we back up for just a second? I think it would be helpful for the committee to hear a little bit about what the purpose of the adverse attorney policy is, what the motivation behind it is, and what you're trying to accomplish. I think that would give us a little bit more context, because we're talking about very specific things, but we haven't really heard what the intention of the policy is set to accomplish. Can you give us an idea?
It's for us, it's a pretty straightforward policy. We have lawyers that are adverse to us. We're involved in litigation, and we don't want those lawyers to be doing anything that in any way, shape, or form could negatively implicate the litigation at issue. Beyond that, we have nothing further to add.
Got it. Okay, BJ?
Yeah. I just have, that adverse attorney policy, my first question is, what other policies do you have? Do you have like adverse vendor policy? I mean, because of the amount of power that Madison Square Garden has in using this spatial technology, like maybe after today's meeting, you're going to put us on that list too, because we're adverse vendors to MSG asking this question. That's like Con Edison saying, Con Edison does get sued a lot as well. It's like Con Edison saying all the attorneys who sue us, we're not going to give them electricity and power. So it's very interesting. But my question actually is, what other policies do you have besides the attorney adverse policy, if any?
We're not going to run down the series of policies that we have. As I stated in my initial remarks, the policy is in terms of individuals not being allowed in. We have one cohort of individuals that either, in an example, during a game, ran on the court and hit a player, right? And so we will not allow those individuals in. This is an example of misconduct. And we have a second policy focused on attorneys that are involved in active litigation. And I want to underline that, active litigation. The second the litigation is over, they're more than welcome to attend any event at the Garden. But while there's active litigation, we have chosen not to allow those individuals, those attorneys in.
Libby, you had another question?
Yeah, I just wanted more of an example to understand the sort of like the dangerous element, like someone who's been banned because they've proven like a hazard to like the employees of the Garden in all of these different ways. I'm having a hard time understanding what the adverse type of litigation you're talking about, as opposed to I might have an easier time with something like a slip and fall where, oh, we don't want them to come to a game, see something else we might be doing that then they could use as an example in that litigation. This type of litigation, I have a harder time understanding what sort of the danger to the legal elements would be. I don't know if you're going to comment on that, but I'm having a hard time understanding sort of the background. What's the fear?
I appreciate the confusion. We have nothing else to add.
Based on what they're saying, it's just my impression that the adverse attorney policy is very broad with respect to any litigation that is adverse to the Garden, but they exclude, like they said, those two categories that are not. Would that characterization be correct?
Correct.
Okay, it's intended to be a very broad policy with limited exceptions.
I also had a question about when and how attorneys were notified in you said June 2022? Whether it was like how, in what manner were all of the attorneys who are working on like a completely different thing, like they're M&A attorneys or something, and they're still at the firm, even if it's a different division, they're still excluded.
Sure. So letters were sent to every impacted firm. In most cases, multiple letters were sent to the firms. We tried to identify the managing partners at the firms, and we also sent letters to the attorneys who were identified as having filed the complaint against the Madison Square Garden entity in the case. So in some cases, it would be at a small firm, typically 1 or 2 lawyers. At a larger firm, it might be as many as 5 lawyers. And each of those lawyers received a letter that urged and directed them to communicate the temporary exclusion to all of the other attorneys at the firm.
And this is an ongoing thing, so if somebody filed suit against the garden tomorrow, you would do that same practice to that firm?
That is correct.
Okay. Anything else from the committee before I go to the public?
Yes, can you gentlemen, it's Todd here. Can you gentlemen
Todd.
speak to the issue of, of people because too much alcohol being served to people in the garden and, problems in the immediate vicinity thereafter, after they exit?
Sure. So I just, you mentioned public urination on properties near us or on storefronts. I just want to say, we've never heard those complaints. I'm not suggesting, I have no idea whether those things are happening. Certainly, if our neighbors are experiencing problems and they believe that they're attributable to guests leaving our venue, we'd like to hear from them, and we certainly want to work with them. But we have not heard that, and I think that it's reasonable to question whether or not, if people are publicly urinating overnight in this neighborhood, whether or not, I would not first assume that it's our guests that are leaving Madison Square Garden that are responsible for that. That aside, I want to assure you that the responsible management of the sale of alcoholic beverages in Madison Square Garden is of the highest priority. To that end, we have a variety of policies and procedures that protect against both sales to minors and sales to intoxicated patrons. And where we start is with training and certification. All of our front of house employees are required to undertake what is called techniques for effective alcohol management training and to pass the team test to be certified. Now, I will tell you that in our industry, team training and team certification is widely regarded as the gold standard. Now, it is not simply a one-time training, and it is not simply a one-time certification. Every employee must retrain and recertify every 3 years. If your certification isn't current, you don't work. So who takes the training and certification? Anyone who is involved in the service of alcohol must train and certify. All of our security personnel must train and certify. All of our ushers, our guest experience personnel, our managers, our supervisors, our management team, all the way up to the general manager of the building, are team trained and certified. We have a variety of policies that we enforce to ensure the safe sale of alcohol. No patron is permitted to purchase more than 2 drinks in any single transaction. 2 drinks maximum. We do not permit sales, and we train our personnel. They may not serve anyone who is visibly intoxicated. Our employees are required to obtain identification from any patron who appears to be 40 years or younger. If a guest appears to be intoxicated when entering the building, they will be denied entry. How do we enforce all of this? It's all well and good to say it. we employ on a regular basis a secret shopper program. Now, the employees don't know who the secret shoppers are, but they do know that we use that program. And they do know that any given individual who is coming up to order from them could be a secret shopper. So they are well advised not to be very conservative in their approach and to make sure that they do not violate any of our policies. If we determine that an employee has violated one of these policies, they are subject to termination. We also employ cutoffs. If you have attended a Knick game, you know that you may not purchase an alcoholic beverage once the fourth quarter begins. Similarly, if you're at a Ranger game, you may not purchase an alcoholic beverage at one of our public bars after the third period begins. We have similar cutoffs for MMA, for boxing, for concerts. Every event that we have has a designated cutoff at which alcohol sales are discontinued. At every event, we have a substantial security presence. Our security force are entirely made up of our employees. We do not rely on a third party to police at Madison Square Garden. Everyone here is our employee. Everyone is trained by us. The only additional security presence there is are New York Police Department off-duty police officers. Those police officers are provided by NYPD pursuant to the NYPD's paid detail program. So they are working for us. They are not working for the city when they are present, but they provide another mechanism for enforcement of our policies at events. When our events conclude, we deploy our security officers to the exits and to the perimeters of our building to ensure an orderly and safe egress. Now, you mentioned that there was a problem of public urination. We have 40 public bathrooms at Madison Square Garden located throughout our venue. Those bathrooms are open the minute, all of them are open the minute the first guest is allowed into the venue, and none of them close until the last guest has exited the venue. There is ample opportunity for any of our guests who require a bathroom or a restroom to avail themselves of the facilities we provide. We take our role here very seriously, and I am confident that we are one of the leaders in the industry in terms of responsible alcohol sales.
Thank you, Hal. One initial question from me. To the extent that a resident in the area does experience an unruly patron or a guest that does something they're not supposed to do, what means can they use to contact the garden?
They could contact our guest relations office, and that will be communicated. Anyone who has an issue can contact guest relations, and guest relations will determine who the appropriate management personnel are to address their problem, whether it's an issue that they had while they were at the garden or with a neighbor who is experiencing an issue based on an event at the garden or patrons leaving the garden.
Do you have a contact number handy?
I do not, but we will provide it to you.
Yeah, we'll get that to you.
Okay, thank you. Anything else from the committee?
No, I just wanted to say, I work in the area and I raised this issue because on multiple occasions, I've seen people in Ranger jerseys, urinating in the neighborhood, including a father and two sons. So, I mean, it does happen. I didn't call anybody to report it. There was actually nobody to report it to. I guess one of the questions that we get generally, not just on this license, is just where does your responsibility end? And presumably for the garden, it ends maybe a little bit further out than just the doors. And, one of the concerns is that there are a lot of public improvements going in on 33rd Street and elsewhere. And, the last thing we want to see is for a big investment in public space that then becomes a public bathroom. So,
David, do you notice this behavior in any particular location that maybe they can apply security to, or
well, I mean,
is it just a general?
yeah, I mean, I was along the frontage, along 7th Avenue. I commute down 7th Avenue and the 2 or 3 times I saw it, it was all like right there.
Yeah. All right. Sarah?
Quick comment, as a long-term resident of New York City, I have seen this type of public urination. The man will just go into a doorway or some crook of a building.
Sure.
I walk by and pretend not to notice.
Catherine?
Yeah, I was going to just comment here, or, to the garden, I would say that there have, the idea of good neighbors in a changing landscape changes. There are neighbors around you who have probably been residents for as long as the garden has been residents. And it's not always so easy as people are aging and finding their ways. It would be helpful if the garden made some effort, because of the significant off-hour events and just because of who you are in the neighborhood, if you would have some kind of friendly neighbor conversations that would open up space for neighbors to be able to talk, because people do see things and we keep walking by it, but that doesn't mean it can't change, and that doesn't mean it has to be always a big thing. It doesn't always have to be, there are small acts that can have a big yield, but you have to create space. And so, I know a neighbor in the neighborhood who has a beautiful garden. And he's told me, he lives right off of 33rd Street. He's mentioned to me a few times that, sometimes at night crowds, those are beyond your legal responsibilities. But as neighbors, you may be able to help if you open the door and let us know if you're hearing a lot of things from neighbors you haven't heard, but at least people feel like, they feel like they can come to CB5, but they could tell you some more things that you might be able to remedy more easily. That's all I have to say.
Committee members here and committee member and the chair, we would be happy to partner with you to give our neighbors a safe space to have these conversations. And we want to be part of the solution. I mean, Hal spent 5 minutes detailing how vigilant we at least want to be on this matter. And so if we can partner with you to have a better result for the entire community, we would be happy to do that.
Thank you. Anything else before we go to the public?
Just one more thing.
Go ahead, Todd.
This is to the applicant. Can you comment at least on just the broad status of the existing litigation or procedural process that's taking place? Does that concern the equal access issue that we're discussing at the hearing, or the image recognition? Is that something that is at issue between the garden and the SLA at this time?
We're not prepared at this public hearing to detail the litigation and ongoing conversations that we're having with the SLA.
Rich, is the claim against the garden public record? Is that something you could speak to, just what the claim against you is?
That's not something that we'd like to speak to.
Okay,
To the extent it's public, everybody has access to newspapers. There's many things on Westlaw and other things, but in this forum, we're not prepared to discuss it.
got it. Anything else before we go to the public?
I just have one question on, when you say you deploy security officers to the egress routes and the exit at the end of events, where do you consider the boundary of MSG? Do you go all the way out to the curb, to the street, or do you simply go to the exits? And I ask because I'm a season ticket holder. I go to MSG fairly often. When I'm inside, everything is very controlled, but for sure, when you get to the curb, and right this in that same block, it can be a little bit more unwieldy. So I'm just curious where you consider the boundary.
Well, there are legal boundaries. It's not where so our property runs on the western side to a few feet before the curb on 8th Avenue between 31st and 33rd Street. At the corners, it sort of cuts a little bit differently. On 7th Avenue, that is not our property. That's Vornado property. Our property line actually ends at the steps that you walk up. If you're walking in from 7th Avenue, you walk past Penn Plaza. And when you get to those steps, that's when you're on our property. We do try to have some security presence on both 8th Avenue and 7th Avenue, and to have some paid detail officers. They're not going to extend to the other side of 7th Avenue. Obviously, our rights as a property owner, there are limitations on once we're no longer on our property. We don't go north of 33rd Street or south of 31st Street. And we don't go east or west.
Okay. Thank you.
Anything else before we go to the public? Samir, while we're going to public comment, can you do some quick research and let us know what the claim is about?
Yep.
Would any member from the public like to comment on this matter? Please use the raise hand button now. We're open for public comment now. If any member of the public would like to speak, please use the raised hand button now. Okay, first up, Serge. Serge, we're going to promote you to panelist. Please turn on your video and unmute yourself to speak. Okay, Serge, tell us who you are.
Hi, my name is Serge Harnett. I'm a member of the 29th Street Neighborhood Association. And I just had one question. This policy that you have implemented towards attorneys, how long has this been in place? Is this something new, or is this something that's been going on for time?
Through the chair, as I stated in my prepared remarks, we implemented this policy beginning in June of 2022.
Thank you. That's my question.
Okay. Anyone else from the public like to comment on this matter? Please raise your hand now. Okay, seeing none, we'll go into business session. During the business session, only the committee members are allowed to discuss the matter. No further input from the public or the applicant is appropriate unless requested by the chair. So we'll begin the business session. Samir, are you able to find anything?
Yeah, at least from what I've found, the overall timeline, just to go over it, is as they mentioned in June 2022, MSG started this adverse attorney policy. And so a number of lawyers who were banned from the garden brought lawsuits opposing their exclusion from the garden. And I think the thing that we're talking about right now is that there was a claim from Madison Square Garden that the New York State Liquor Authority is colluding with the lawyers who are bringing these lawsuits. And so that is.
What,
The SLA filed administrative charges.
yeah, this is what I want to hear.
Against MSG in March of, it looks like March of 23. I'm quoting from the Post now, seeking to strip James Delano properties, including MSG, Radio City Music Hall, and Beacon Theater of liquor licenses.
Speak up a little bit.
The SLA filed administrative charges against MSG in March, seeking to strip James Dolan-owned properties, including MSG, Radio City Music Hall, and Beacon Theater, of liquor licenses over a policy that bars lawyers with open cases against Dolan or the Garden from the properties.
So it's an administrative hearing by the
By
SLA.
the SLA, and then MSG is claiming that there was collusion between the SLA and the lawyers involved in trying to, combat that of some kind. That's what it seems. This is where,
And
again, according to the Post.
can anyone get us information like what the claim is, the administrative claim?
Sure.
Is it really about equal access?
Nick, let me just say that I came across multiple articles in the press that seem to indicate that it was in fact an equal access claim. So,
Okay.
It would be nice to hear from the applicant. I understand that they're under orders not to speak about it, but, we have some backup on it. Obviously, we can dig deeper and find out exactly what's in the public record.
I just think that having the context for the committee would be helpful, that's all. Okay, we're in business session. Who wants to speak? Libby?
I think this is sort of on its face, like inconsistent and also like feels very clearly punitive. If you have an attorney who's like an M&A attorney, like isn't even a litigator, and like Paul Weiss is suing, having someone who's working on like some business deal, like not even remotely close, but a legal secretary who is literally working on that case, has information, like isn't barred. It feels like it's additional like business pressure, like personal. It feels like personally, like I'm gonna try to get you to drop the case or move faster or create some sort of like thing, especially if it's like torts where you might in theory have some investigator come in and find other instances of a complaint. That feels weird. It also feels like a violation of access of, especially given the size of these venues and like their like importance to New York City cultural events, like the Rockettes, the Knicks, like it's pretty basic stuff that to bar, even if, as Todd said, it's only a handful of people, it's actually a wider scope than even people who are specifically working on a specific case. And even then, I'm also very confused of what I don't know, I wouldn't speak to it, but what's the damage they're afraid is going to happen to them.
Samir?
This is more of a question for you, Nick, if that's okay.
Yep.
Like, what are we considering today? Like, I'm not really clear on what our role is. Like, there's clearly pending litigation, and at some point a judge will issue a ruling. So I guess like my confusion is like, why are we pontificating on what is legal or not when it's gonna go through the court system?
So the context of this application is whether the liquor license should be renewed.
Okay.
Even though it's been renewed already, we still have the ability to comment. So we're exercising our rights to comment on the liquor license renewal. And to the extent we want to include equal access concerns or public safety concerns, we can do that.
I see. So like hypothetically, sorry, we might write a resolution or whatever it is saying like, we think that, perhaps this license should have only been renewed if they were willing to change this or that policy. Okay.
Sure.
That's like an example. Okay, got it. Thank you.
And provide a number to contact for concerns, as we do with many other affidavits.
Yeah. John?
What I'm struggling with is, and as recently as December, an appeals court allowed the SLA investigation to proceed. Is the fact that the SLA has renewed the license mean that they have closed the administrative No, those are two separate actions. They
Yeah.
renewed the license even though they have a pending administrative investigation.
There's a
against
very
MSG.
high bar to
Okay.
terminate a license or not renew a
So
license.
those two things are not related. They're still continuing the investigation.
Right, and if the investigation or the ultimate
action, yeah.
judicial decision goes against MSG, then the
Got it.
SLA will be
Okay.
able to terminate the
That's,
license.
okay.
Or issue a fine.
Yeah, I mean,
I just don't know what the penalties are from the SLA.
could be anything. I mean, I'm not sure what the SLA is seeking, if it's seeking injunctive relief, if it's seeking termination of the license. I don't really know. And it doesn't sound like we were able to figure that out.
Not exactly.
Okay.
But we can file a freedom of information request, it sounds like.
Yeah, well, I don't know, we have very smart people on the committee, we may be able to find out more information about this. Seth, you've been nodding your head, did you want to say anything?
No.
No thoughts, okay. Anyone else? Todd, back to you.
Okay, so I've given this a lot of thought, and I thank the Gardens attorneys for coming up and making, a very clear presentation. The SLA has its responsibility, and they're continuing their administrative process and hearings. We can certainly find out more about it, but we have our own responsibility. I think that as regards the public urination issue, I think what I heard was reasonable. And, this is New York City after all. I think that what they're doing sounds reasonable and, well thought out. As to the other two issues, I think that the equal access issue, I think that based on what we've heard, I think that it's drawn too broadly. Okay, certainly the garden, everybody here knows based on, our committee's previous discussions of the use of digital imagery, that, using it in this way is not really ideal. But just as an equal access issue, I think that the way they're treating attorneys, it's way too broadly drawn. What I can understand from a legal perspective, that they don't want anything to happen with people on the litigation team, going in and snooping around, as unlikely as that seems, right? I think that, there's something that can be said for that. But the idea, we've got some big law firms in the city, and the example I gave where a lawyer who has nothing to do with the case is going to be excluded from seeing the Knicks and the Rangers or the circus. I think that that's unfair, and that goes against the whole point of the equal access provision in the liquor license. So what I would suggest, I think it's our responsibility as a community board to call attention to the fact that in this case, it's just too broadly drawn. I think that a more reasonable approach would be to either not do it at all or limit it to only those people in the firm that have a material or active connection to the case, right? So I think that the granting of the liquor license, the way it is in New York State, when you grant the license, there's some concept of the public interest that's involved, right? It may not be a lot, but it's something. So I would recommend that we consider drafting a resolution and get it on the record that in this case, what we've heard from the garden is that it's just too broadly drawn. As to the issue of the use of digital imagery, right? Yes, of course, terrorists, known felons, other people, the systems and using digital imagery databases. I know it's used widely, but again, if we're concerned with people as individuals, people who are good citizens and innocent, right? Using the imagery to exclude them in this manner, when in New York State, the case law indicates you cannot use the images without the permission of the person, even though the connection is somewhat attenuated. The garden may not be taking the images themselves, they're getting it from third-party services, but that doesn't make it right. I think that, we should certainly comment on that. And again, I'm interested to hear what really we're balancing all these interests. I'd be interested to see what the other people on the committee have to say, but I think we should keep these broad principles in mind. And it's proper for us as a community board, even though the license has been already granted, that we go on record with this, because, it'll come back in 2 years. It'll come back in 2 years before the committee. I'll say one other thing, which, I've deliberately avoided saying it. There is a history in this with the garden and their ownership of, excluding people from the garden for what may be less than fair or rational reasons. Maybe, our concern and jurisdiction is limited only to the liquor licenses, but I think at some level we have to take that into account. Okay, so that's what I have to say, and I hope it'll be considered.
Does anyone disagree? Any other opinions? John?
I somewhat disagree. I think we need to be careful. We are not a judicial body. And so I get very concerned when I start hearing about us registering our displeasure based on our interpretation of legal grounds. We are not a judicial body. All of these issues are currently in front of judicial bodies, and we should allow that to play out. Now, if we want to register our displeasure because we think on behalf of the people of our district, it's not fair and we don't like it, that's okay. So I just want to make sure we're staying in our lane here and not making broad proclamations of our interpretation of New York State law. That's not our purview. But if we say, okay, there are a lot of lawyers who live in our districts and they should be able to go see a Knicks game, that's a different story and that is in our purview. So I just want to make sure.
I think you're saying a lot of the same things that Todd was saying, and what I wrote down based on Todd's comments is that we think the policy is too broad. That's not a legal conclusion, but I think we're safe there.
Okay.
And I think that also gets to what you're saying is that we don't think it's fair, or, we don't think it's fair for the members of our district, because it's too broad.
Right. Okay.
Right? Libby?
I understand Garen's point of the intention behind why we're saying the policy shouldn't exist at all, because you should be able
No,
to.
I think what he's concerned about is us coming to a legal conclusion, saying that.
But we're not.
Let me finish. He's worried about us coming to a legal conclusion, saying that this policy violates the equal access provisions of the ABC law. And we're not going to do that.
Great.
Got it? David?
On the digital image question,
Okay.
Shoplifters don't register with Macy's. So I don't know where you draw this line of, who grants permission for the use of digital images. I assume, airports and the other examples, casinos, they're not getting releases from people to use those images in their security system. So I don't know where we draw the line on that. We could narrow it to the same discussion that the people that, are attorneys at firms that aren't directly involved in litigation shouldn't be in their system and shouldn't be excluded, but I don't know how much further you take it.
The example that he gave with unruly patrons and, that I get because they have, video of those patrons in action, but I don't know where they get attorney's pictures.
And so I just wanted to register that I'm not really comfortable, I can understand the case, our own argument for this is too broad, so maybe we're okay with narrowing it, but I actually have kind of a problem with, I still don't really understand, their purpose behind it, for what would go wrong, especially if it's not all attorneys, just I actually think that because it's kind of a public good to begin with, because of the scale, I think it's a different standard than one lawyer who's representing someone going into, who's in conflict with some bar on their block. That, okay, this is a small scale thing, but this feels larger scale that I would actually propose, and curious what everyone else has to say. like to eliminate any sort of policy like that, like just lodging our displeasure with it.
I was curious too about the motivation behind the policy. We got a little bit of an answer, but they weren't really comfortable giving us more. But I imagine everyone feels that way too, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm reading a statement from James Dolan on January 26, 2023, so about a year ago, but the tone of the statement seems very clear that they are frustrated at these lawyers who are, they claim like money grabbers, and they're, making up cases of slips and falls and all that, and they're using their position as Madison Square Garden to bar the whole firm in order to, potentially disincentivize them from filing these bogus claims. So I understand what they're trying to do. I'm sure it's super frustrating, but I agree that it's just like you said, it's potentially a public good, like Con Edison taking advantage of their position in order to, yeah.
Also, just that statement conflicts with what they said tonight, right? Because tonight, the slip and fall in that statement, they said tonight that the torts of slip and fall attorneys are allowed. Oh, they said they're not allowed. Okay.
When I asked for an example of
Who it
who
counts
would
as
be
being bar.
excluded,
Okay.
right, they gave slip and fall as the example.
I imagine they have hundreds of these cases, small cases. I tripped down the stairs or something like that, and they're putting this policy in place to protect against that.
Okay.
Samir?
I totally acknowledge that it's too broad or whatever else, but I want to strongly push back on this idea that it's a public good. If you don't have Con Ed serving you electricity and it's a cold day or a very hot day, you will die. Like this idea, I'm not opposed to the idea of the argument. I just want to be very clear that I think comparing MSG, which is, if you think sports are important, fine, whatever. But if they ban you, you just watch the game on TV, that's fine. It's like, if we don't think that's okay, that's okay. But I don't want to be on record anywhere comparing it to Con Ed or another public utility where if you don't have it, you can actually die.
Don't they have a
I
license?
think it was a
because of
good
their
analogy,
size?
but I
Because
think
of their size and scale, isn't it like, isn't there some element of public licensing that also counts as because of their scale, they're held to
I mean,
different public?
it's private property.
Yeah.
They
but
have a
it's
license to serve alcohol to the public.
But also like the
The public
assembly,
doesn't-
the public assembly piece of it too, though, right?
Yeah, that's not,
It's not our department, but
no. It's private property that has a license to serve alcohol to the public.
Yeah.
That's, so,
I also wanted to echo that I think it's like absolutely a private company. They're one of the largest and most profitable live entertainment companies in the nation. It's publicly traded. Definitely not a public good, from my perspective. Like in terms of the issues, I totally agree that we should hold them to the same standard of just like being open to community feedback, having a channel for communications. On the adverse attorney policy, I totally agree with Ford that it's a little too broad to be effective.
okay, so I see we're sort of narrowing down our focus, and I think that's appropriate. On the public safety, I think we do want to include something like that in our resolution, putting on record that we have received these comments and complaints, but that the applicant has agreed to provide the guest relations office number for us to direct any of those comments to, and that they've also offered to continue an additional dialogue on any issues affecting the community. We should put that of record in our resolution. Anything else?
Just
BJ?
a comment that, I used to work at Con Edison. so I can say
BJ,
this.
you don't have to defend your analogy.
No. What I'm saying is, those utility companies, there's a public service commission that actually oversees. So in this
Yeah,
case, it
they're
is a private
licensed.
company. And this is their policy, but I think as a community board, with the access point, I think makes sense. And ultimately, their license to operate is ruled by, if they wanted to do another merger, let's say they want to do merger with Barclays Center, which they don't, then that's a time when the community can speak up, right? But because there's an overseeing body. But unfortunately, like, as you said, we do stay in our lane. I think it disturbs me that, that if I'm an attorney looking at probably the names Facebook or social media, LexisNexis and law things, but it's very disturbing that I'm gonna be banned because of where I work, the whole firm, not even though I'm not involved. That's disturbing. And also that they could exercise this amount of, in some ways, discrimination. I see this like as a discrimination. I think the first time I heard about it was on news about the mom who took her Girl Scouts to see the Radio City and was banned, yeah. And if they had not, if this, for example, if that had not been an issue and that story didn't come out, we would not have heard about their adverse attorney policy.
All right, so I think, David,
Sorry, but would we ask for an affidavit on elements of these, the public
I don't think so.
safety piece
I don't-
or?
I don't think we need that. Okay, so I think
Nick,
based
just
on.
really
Yeah,
quick, really quick. Can we add something just about a little more transparency with these policies? I mean, it should be on record. If this is what their policy is, they should be saying
On the website.
very clearly, this is what
I
this
think
is
they
what
were
we're
clear-
doing in a public way.
So I think they were clear that the attorneys that are temporarily, what's the word, excluded, are properly notified. Whether the public needs to hear that, in a more official way.
Not a public listing, just a public listing of this is the policy that this policy, because I think you have to let me be me. If this was happening to me and I was an attorney, I swear it was because I was a woman or I was Black or I was this, that, or so at least if it's already on record, I would know that I wasn't being pinpointed for some other reason. Transparency is a tool. I just think it should be, if it's something that they don't have to publish the list, but they should at least publish in a very public way their policy.
I think I would put a different spin on your comment. I don't think we can ask the garden to publicly publish all of their policies. But what I do like about your comment, we asked for a little bit more of an explanation behind the exclusion policy, and we didn't really get that. So maybe what we can ask for in our resolution is a little bit more transparency behind the motivation of the policy. Because if we're saying that the policy is too broad, and I think we all agree on that point,
Right.
It might be helpful to know what the intent of the policy is that we think is too broad. So I think, does the committee like adding that question? I think we think that's fair, but I wouldn't go as far as you were saying,
Okay.
and
All right.
about disclosing every policy that they have. I don't think I agree with that unless other people do. Okay, so let's make a motion on the limited where the committee's ended up. With the objections that we have. Todd, do you want to make that motion?
No, you're muted.
Todd, we can't hear you.
You're muted, Tom.
Yeah, I'll make a motion that with regard to the extension of the liquor license and the circumstances around it, that we have concerns about the broad nature of the exclusion of the attorneys. We'd like to hear more about the intention behind it. And we also have concerns about aspects of the digital imagery, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, as Nick said. And, we hope that the applicant will make available relevant information to people to follow up about incidents that take place in the vicinity and what we've discussed tonight.
Continue a dialogue with the public, any issues that they have. Okay. Is there a
Nick,
second?
Nick, I'm sort of doing this on the fly. Are you taking notes, right?
Yeah,
I've got it.
yeah.
If you can
Yes,
just.
we are.
forward me
And
notes.
the meeting's also being recorded.
Okay,
Okay, so before we bring this to a vote, I just want to ask the committee to stay on, even members are attending digitally. After our vote tonight, we're going to have a presentation on the committee's new application tracking system. So I know you'll all want to see that. So let's take this to a vote. Motion to deny.
Nick,
Yes.
David is a yes. Seth,
Yes.
Sarah,
Yes,
Catherine,
Yes.
Libby,
Yes.
Miles,
Yes.
Samir,
Yes.
Yaron,
Yes.
Tiffany,
Yes.
Todd,
Yes.
BJ,
Yes.
Sachi,
Yes.
Zona,
Yes.
Janice.
Yes.
Passes.
Okay, thank you, Rich and Hal. I want to thank you again for participating. We really appreciate your participation. Please send us the customer relations information so we can pass that on to anyone that has comments that should get to you.
Chair, if I could, I
Yeah.
did get the guest relations phone number, and I'd just like to give that to you.
Thank
if
you.
Please share, yeah, it's 212-465-6225, 212-465-6225. In addition, we have an email, which is simply guestrelations, all one word, @msg.com. And we do genuinely look forward to partnering with you on these issues. Happy to attend any forum that you put together, happy to meet with you privately and the broader team as well, as we work on these problems.
Great. Thank you both for attending. Have a great night.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay, that ends the public hearing, and we'll now begin presentation on our tracking system.
One second.
Did you turn off the Zoom? Oh, no, it's still on.
Well, we need it for Todd.
Catherine, you still there? You can hear me? Okay.
Yes, I'm here. I can still hear you.
One second, let me run back to my computer. I think I'm having a slight sharing issue. Okay.
MSG doesn't pay any taxes, right?
Yeah, that's good.
They don't pay real estate.
The sales tax,
Yeah.
well, so on the alcohol,
The consumer pays that.
yeah. I mean, the state gets the revenue from.
Yeah, they,
consumer
well,
paying
they, but like they collect it, but I'm paying it when I buy beer.
You're
Or
gonna buy
that
beer.
beer.
Oh, what's that?
Yeah.
No, we're not being recorded.
Sachi, you live near the garden.
Yeah.
Do you ever notice any of these public safety issues?
I mean, it's busy, I don't like, it's kind of, I mean, I would say that public urination is a problem kind of everywhere.
But you don't see people in
But-
Ranger jerseys.
Not necessarily, but I don't know that I'm, I wouldn't put it past them. Yeah.
I also had a question about, for a while, this is pre-pandemic, but there was sort of, like an active kind of like, I don't know, encampment of some kind of like people who'd been using drugs. On like one side, but I asked because like I had like a sexual assault issue, like right next to the garden, and then it was like never closed. But I was wondering if that was still part of it. Obviously, these aren't people going to the garden, but I was wondering if the safety in general in the area had changed.
I mean, it's interesting, right? Like, there's the 34th Street bid, which like, when I think about like cleanliness, like around Macy's and Herald Square, like
Yeah.
what a clean area. Oh my goodness. And then like you get over to the garden and Penn Station and it feels really different.
Mhm.
And that's a statement, not a, I don't know.
I mean, I know Tornado and the bid have rehoused.
Okay.
I think a couple of hundred people that were kind of part of the permanent population. So I think with Breaking Ground, they've been able to rehouse a lot of those people in supportive housing. So that seems to be
Have been helpful, yeah.
yeah, definitely been helpful.
Yeah, this guy was definitely like on drugs. But
But, you know, I kind of resented his comment saying that if it happens, it could be in the middle of the night and it's the residents around this area that's doing it. kind of saying those who come to the garden are not at that level. I'm like, give me a break, like, especially when they've been at a
It's
game
not
and
like
drinking
you're
lots
like,
of beer.
you're
Yeah.
in the jerseys, like,
Yeah.
the game just let out, like,
Wasn't much of a question.
the
Yeah.
causality here isn't.
Exactly, and especially when they, as soon as the game's over, they usher everybody out, so you
Yeah.
can't even use the bathroom.
I'm
So,
sure he said,
you
whenever
don't
he
take
said
this
there's
risk.
40 bathrooms, I'm curious actually whether that's a high or low percentage for the capacity of the venue.
Yeah.
Like, that sounds like a lot, but
Don't even let me
actually,
start with the women's
modern
bathroom.
venues,
Yeah, they
modern venues
remodeled
may have a
some of
much
the
higher
women's bathrooms
percentage.
at MSG, and I
Mm.
remember being like pleasantly surprised that there were more of them, and they'd expanded the number.
All right, let's turn attention to Josh. He's the man of the hour and he created this new spreadsheet and system for us to use.
Hey, we like this.
So this is what we're going to be using in place of the old team assignment tracker. I don't know how many of you guys had access to that or remember that, but this is what I think is gonna be a little more helpful. So let's see here. So you can see here, this is just kind of the explainer tab. If you guys ever have questions.
Are you recording this?
Say again?
Are you recording this?
I'm not.
Record it and start over.
Okay.
Record on this computer.